Hello, hello. Whoa. Oh, okay. Yep. Here, here, here. Yes. Okay, everyone, and welcome. My name is Marie Harbodale. I work here at So Central. I'll be your moderator, your host for this afternoon. Before we get started, just a few items of practical information. There's, for those of you who are not following the stream but are here at Centralen, we have toilets in the back. Just go all the way to the back and on your left. Emergency exits, we evacuate down the stairs by the elevators if there's a fire alarm or something that goes off. If you need coffee or water as we talk, just please go and get it. And we'll wrap up by 2. So we'll keep the conversation going until then. I think that's it for practical items. Sophia here will take the microphone out in case or when you want to join the conversation, because we really want you to. We're on this stage, but we are no more important than you. So any thoughts, ideas, questions that you have, please raise your hand and wave at me until I see you. And then Sophia will take the microphone to you. And for those of you on the stream, unfortunately, we won't be able to take your questions. But if you have something that you want to add, just email us after when you get the email from us. All right, we'll kick things off. Welcome to this space. For those of you here, you are at So Central, which is a community for people who are trying to create this citizen change in our society. A lot of you are members. A lot of you follow us on our newsletters or on LinkedIn. And if you don't, please get connected. Yeah, we're gonna get the conversation started. The reason we're here today is, I think, this book, Citizens, Jon wrote. I've been lying about having read for about a year. In my defense, I had a baby. But my colleagues kept referring to this book and this very interesting idea in it. And I kept saying, yes, great book. I agree. It's very important. And then when I realized that I was hosting this event this week, I realized I did have to read it. And I now have read it, and I very much recommend it.
Especially crash reading.
Yeah. Okay, but we're going to get started with you, Jon, and this book that you wrote. Can you just take us through the main ideas in this book? Why did you write it, and what's in it?
Sorry. Hello. It's lovely to be here. I am extraordinarily excited because we've just had some amazing conversations that hopefully we'll get into. But what I'm going to do is just share with you my favourite story from the research for the book, because I'm basically a storyteller, and then set out the kind of core framework of ideas that's in the book and in all of my work, and then maybe hint at why I'm so deeply excited today, and then let Sandra tell you a bit more of the substance behind that rather than just my sort of bubbly effervescence. My favourite story from the research for the book actually comes from almost the other side of the world, which is in Taiwan, and it's the story of the transformation of the Taiwanese government over the last 10 years or so. And the story begins back in 2012, and the government at the time launched what they called the Economic Power-Up Plan. And they did it with communications that said things, and this is almost a word-for-word quote, said things like, don't let's waste time talking about policies and complicated things like that. We'll get on with growing the economy, and you get on with your lives. It was a breed of communication I like to call shush little people, just go shopping. And it seemed to go down all right at first, but sort of in the background, just under the surface, originally a group of hackers, software developers, started to organize themselves. And they called themselves Gov0, because what they were doing was creating parallel websites to government websites, all of which had the URLs that ended g0v.tw instead of .gov.tw. And on these websites, they made budget lines available for upvote and downvote, and they created conversation menus that you could download and use to talk about the workings of government around your kitchen table and all of this sort of stuff. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't like an overnight phenomenon, right? but it started to grow, and people started to sort of engage in it. And then 2 years on, the government tried to rush through a trade bill with mainland China under the banner of the Economic Power-Up Plan. And at that point, a protest broke out, Occupy-style protest, became known as the Sunflower Revolution. And protesters occupied the parliament. And what they did inside the parliament was they started using the GovZero tools to discuss the clauses of the trade bill. And the GovZero gang got a broadband connection in and streamed footage of what the protesters were doing all over the country, first on social media, and then it got picked up on broadcast news and so on. And the conversation started to shift. And then the critical moment came when the Speaker of the Parliament came under pressure to boot the protesters out. And he didn't. Everyone thought he was going to. I've interviewed a bunch of people around this. They were like, the odds were that he was going to kick them out, and several people said to me, GovZero would have gone back to being a kind of art project, right? But he didn't. Instead, he said, this is what this space is for. This is what we should be doing here. And in that moment, the whole story of the relationship between citizen and state shifted, really. So the Speaker promised the protesters that the trade bill would get due scrutiny, got due scrutiny, got thrown out. 6 months later, there were municipal elections all over Taiwan. Candidates were elected who'd stood by the protests, often from nowhere, with no speeches written. Who, me? And then in response to that, the central government invited one of the leaders of the hacker movement to become a mentor to a government minister and start to bring some of the workings of GovZero into central government. Fast forwarding 2 years on, 2016 presidential election, power changed hands, and that person was invited to become a kind of appointed minister in their own right. So I quite like the hacker to mentor to minister as a 4-year career trajectory. And then fast forwarding again, 4 years on, 2020, anyone remember a thing that happened in 2020? No? So Taiwan's COVID response was then led by this person, and it was, I still don't understand how I am one of the only people that seems to tell this story, but their response was so different to anything anywhere else in the world. It began with the president making a speech in January where she said, we don't know how to get through this, but we do know that we'll get through it best if we tap into the ideas and energy and resources of everyone, if we get everyone involved. They set challenge prizes where people could create apps that would track face mask availability and case outbreaks and this kind of thing, because the tech community, the GovZero crew, had been so kind of key. But they also did some lo-fi stuff, and I always love sharing the story. This is the bit where everyone starts to go, no, he's lying. This isn't real. And it entirely is. They set up a phone line where anyone could ring in with ideas for how the country's response could be better. And a little boy rang up. A little boy rang up and he said, the boys in my class don't want to wear their face masks because they're pink and they think that they're girly. Oh. So you should do something to make pink face masks cool. And I think you should work with the baseball team. 3 days later, 3 days, half the Taiwanese baseball team, the little boy and the president on the national televised press conference in pink face masks. Totally true. And this, by the way, set off a wave of pink is cool memes across the country. They even brought Pink Panther back onto primetime TV. It's all true, I promise you. And we laugh, right? And it is funny, and it's cool and joyful. And it was also the best way to take on that challenge, right? Deadly serious. What better way to understand how little boys are dealing with this challenge than to ask little boys to contribute their ideas, give them agency. And the results speak for themselves. Like Taiwan, second lowest death rate anywhere in the world, after only New Zealand, but never went into lockdown, never went into full lockdown. Whole thing about participatory self-surveillance that they talked about. And so the best way to face that challenge, even that deeply urgent, life-threatening thing, which made most places in the world, almost everywhere in the world, go to a kind of authoritarian logic, actually, that now I think we're feeling very hard to shake off, was best faced by tapping into the ideas and energy and resources of everyone. And so bridging from my favourite story, I'm sure you can see why I quite like it, to the framework of ideas. So the book and all of my work really is an offer of a way of understanding the moment in time we're living in. And the offer I make is to see it through the lens of what I call stories of self and society. And I posit 3 stories. deep stories. And the easiest way to introduce them, and I'm not going to like, the map is never the territory, right? So we can pick this, but the easiest way to introduce them is as a quasi-historical shift. So end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, we were in what I call the subject story, and as in subjects of the king. In the subject story, the right thing to do is to keep our heads down, do as we're told, get what we're given, on the basis that there are a God-given few who know best, who will lead us to the best outcomes for society as a whole. It's a thesis for how the best society results. End of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, that story falls apart, basically, under the weight of its own contradictions, under the weight of the Industrial Revolution, the rise of the middle class. You just couldn't sustain that logic anymore. And I would argue, I do argue, that the collapse of that story leads to World War I and actually World War II, because we didn't change anything. Out of the two world wars, we more or less deliberately, more or less consciously constructed a new story, what I call the consumer story. And the logic of the consumer story is pursue self-interest, choose the best option for you from those that are offered, on the basis that, not as just as a selfish thing, on the basis that self-interest will add up to collective interest. So the Milton Friedman thing, the social responsibility of business is to maximize its profits. That is a statement of consumer logic, right? And what I believe we're living in right now is the collapse of that story, just as the subject story fell apart before. Because you can't solve the challenges of our time from within it, because it created them. So you can't solve a crisis of loneliness and mental ill health from within a story that says we're independent, isolated individuals. Story created the crisis. You can't solve a crisis of inequality from within a story that says that the way to solve social problems is competition, because the story created the crisis. And you can't solve an ecological crisis, most fundamentally, from within a story that says we're separate from nature, that success is ever accumulating material standards of living, because the story created the crisis. And so the story is collapsing. And as that happens, a couple of different things are going on. Firstly, in the sort of uncertainty and loss of coordinates, the subject story is back, right? The strongman leader who says, don't trust them anymore, trust me, I will fix it, and blame them, actually. And particularly in the US, I've been spending quite a bit of time there in the last few months, there is a weird thing going on where the consumer story and the subject story are fusing, which is kind of terrifying. And that's the sort of the Musk-Trump thing of like, and they are deriving their whereas Queen Victoria derived her authority from God, they're deriving theirs from a sort of perverse version of the market. And yet something else is also happening. And this is where the Taiwan story comes in and why it's so important to start there. And I believe, and I'm like so excited, genuinely, to be here, like almost like welling up. But it's like, this is happening. Like there is another story of who we are and what we could be and what we could do. And it's a logic that says, actually, no, it's not about keep your head down, do as you're told. It's not just about pursue self-interest. It's about get involved. Like, contribute your ideas, energy, and resources to the pursuit of the best outcomes. Reinvent our institutions to tap into that collective energy, collective wisdom, collective resource. Because all of us are smarter than any of us, right? That is the logic that lets us actually meaningfully face these challenges. And that is a deeply possible future, right? It's right there. And I could tell you stories, like the joy of my life in the last couple of years since the book came out has been being invited to places and spaces where humble community organisations in Grimsby in northeast England, which tends to be talked about as a left-behind town, where people are coming together. These guys started with litter picks, and last year they raised £500,000 in a community share offer, which is enough to buy all of the houses on their street, buy out all of the abandoned houses, boarded up houses on that street, refit them using good local jobs, let them out as a social landlord, and create a sustainable revenue stream for their organisation. They were given no chance. I could talk about Brownsville, Brooklyn, one of the sort of most deprived neighbourhoods of New York, where community scale violence prevention organisation has now got to the stage where they're having 911 calls rerouted through them because they're more effective. I could talk about Kenya, Nairobi, the slum, where an organisation that started, again, actually with litter picks. We should just do litter picks, right? But like, has now spread and grown and runs a network of girls' schools, medical clinics, and even a microfinance institution that's one of Kenya's most significant financial institutions. Like, and people are trying. People are, and a few of them have managed to create the infrastructure themselves, kind of despite the structures and institutions around us not evolving. But what's starting to happen, and what I think Taiwan speaks to so well, is some places the institutional infrastructure is starting to open up and starting to be kind of cohered. And we're going to talk more about Pådrivere particularly, but that I honestly think this is what you are sitting with, where you are sitting, what we're part of, what Norway could be actually in the world right now, as a catalyst and a champion of this kind of story. I'm like exploding with excitement to be here. So I will stop there because that was a very long answer to the question. Introduce the book.
Perfect. And one of your taglines is citizens, not consumers. But are we anti-market? Like, what does that mean to be a citizen and not a consumer?
I told Marie to do that because I knew I'd forget. It's really super important not to be clear that what I'm not anti-consumption or like, mainly because I don't think those kinds of frames are particularly helpful. Not because, and so one of the ways I express this work is to say, like, what we are today, the dominant story around us and the frame that brings is we are assumed to be consumers who occasionally vote and bring the orientation of consumers to that act even. So I'd say we live in what I would call consumer democracies, where our only agency is to choose between a fixed set of options, and we're assumed to make that choice on the basis of individual self-interest. And that has to die. Like, in my head, the word consumerism has a capital C and a hyphen between the R and the ism. It's that, and that needs to go. But what we become, what we are, what's going on in Taiwan, what I think this place speaks to, is citizens who sometimes consume, right? Like, the verb, there's really interesting social psychology around this. Verbs are kind of on and offable. Like, we can do things without them defining us. Nouns become identity constructs. And we see so often that this word consumers defining, like being interchangeable in so many languages, or with the concept of the public. And that, when we go there, that doesn't work. But this isn't, we're still gonna, like, I'm consuming air now. Like, we had lunch. Like, that's not a sin, right? But to bring that orientation, to move towards that idea, the literal derivation of the word citizen is together people, which I really love. And I think that idea of collective agency, the collective intelligence, collective wisdom, collective resource is the thing I'm talking about, not anti anything.
Perfect, thank you. Thomas, my colleague, we're going to bring you into the conversation because you actually read this book last year and talked about it. So imagine that. What did you think? What happened to you as you were reading this book?
Well, first of all, I just love the title. Also because I think we're sort of lacking that word in Norwegian. So I'm always trying to discuss the earlier. I'm looking for what is the word for citizens? Innbygger, borger, very Danish. Medborger, maybe. Well, I love citizens, and I think reading it was a few things. So one is we started So Central almost 13 years ago, and the reason why we did that was we knew there was a lot of people who wanted to change the system in a more sustainable direction. And there was a lot of research that said that we need to collaborate to do that. and it felt like there was a lot of talking about it, but it didn't really turn. We didn't see the examples, not enough examples. So perhaps it was missing some piece in the middle that could get these kind of collaboration working. So that was the purpose of why we started So Central. And since then, we've been trying to figure out how to do that. And now, being a non-profit organization, running this space, but also running, I think, 80 plus projects on different scales in Norway and some international projects, has sort of taking some of these concepts here, and it was very much resonated, the stories you told in what we've been trying to do. I think Katrine, the partner in So Central, always says something wise, and she, I think for me personally, this book reminded me that there's no one who has control of the system. We think there's someone, smart people up there that see the whole picture. And me personally, I sort of trusted that for too long. I was definitely a consumer first 35 years of my life. And then I started to engage more, and it sort of taught me that there's no one there. It's us. And that's sort of frightening in a way. And then it motivated me in that what we're doing is happening all across the world. And I think we just heard that today as well. I think we're going to get back to that. But hearing stories from other places doing similar stuff gives confidence that we could do more, that we're not alone. I think these stories we're telling now has been told for centuries. There's so much knowledge that's been done before, and this kind of movement is done before. But we keep forgetting, and we keep forgetting what is possible because we think the structures are what they are, and they're not. So even if it's political parties or the way we do things in society, is all a construct of what we want to do. And since in So Central what we aim at is create new structures, models that could change the system, and this was a great inspiration to do that. And also, when reading it, I thought lots about Pådrivere, which is one of the initiatives that we've been part of building. And Pådrivere is we have so many names. We're trying to communicate it in a more sensible way, and hopefully Jon can help us with that moving forward. But it has been created to be this sort of judicial, legal holder of collaboration that everyone owns and no one owns. That works behalf of society and not behalf of any particular stakeholder. And we actually had a meeting yesterday with the vice mayor in Oslo, which is the first time, because she was from, her background was from being on the legal side. And she was so curious about the structure and the legal side of it, because we've been going deep into how do we set up this structure so it's usable. That was the first time ever we heard a politician that was really understood how this was different. And Pådrivere is a structure for all of us who want to be part of changing Oslo or Norway. And it's good for two things. When we want to do something that we can't do by ourselves, we need more stakeholders to do something. And we don't know exactly what the answer is, but we know what the question is. And it's also really good for mobilizing a lot more people, citizens, into taking part in our societal development. So I think with that, I think Sandra can tell some stories about what I looked like. Yep.
Yes. Thank you, Thomas. Because we are also joined on this little stage by Sandra, who leads Pådrivere Oslo. Tell us about Pådrivere Oslo, Sandra.
Thank you. I feel scared to fall off this tiny stage. Whereas you're bubbly and excited, that sort of transfer, and my reaction is, oh my God, I'm getting validation from this person that says important stuff that a lot of people listen to and believe in and feel. So, and then my reaction is, I get exhausted. So instead of being that bubbly, I'm really also very, very excited, and but I do get exhausted from it, and I've had the goosebumps today and almost tears. So But in your book, you do share stories, and we have a lot of stories in Pådrivere as well. So I'm going to share two stories of two very different citizens. So the first story is about Martin. And a few of you here has probably heard this story before, but he was a change maker working within the construction building industry and working towards changing that industry into a more circular one. So he has this immense knowledge about what is needed to transfer into that circularity. And then they had an idea that if we're going to get the construction industry to start reusing the materials from buildings that they tear down, there is a huge problem in storage in between, because we don't need that material until 6 months from now. So we need a physical space to store these materials for either storage or resale. And he meets Statsbygg, which is the Norwegian government's building commissioner, property manager, and developer. So he is representing a small startup with immense knowledge, and it's a commercial startup. And then you have the state that has this tent that is from this. How big is it in English?
4,500 square meters.
Square meters. And they're supposed to just, get rid of it because they don't need it anymore. So Elin at Statsbygg, she's thinking about how can we reuse this. So when they meet, they obviously see this great opportunity for Oslo, for this new possible market, but they can't cooperate bilateral with each other to get this tent somewhere. So this is a small commercial, actor, and they have no financial means of taking on the risk of building a new market, and the state can't give and donate this tent to a commercial actor. So they turn to Pådrivere and they ask, is Pådrivere the right tool for us to get this going? And then this can be a very long story, but I'm gonna, you should all check it out if you don't know it already. But they approach Pådrivere, and having the ecosystem and network already, Pådrivere is able to turn to the municipality and 3 different, entities or of the municipality, and say, this is a major, major opportunity. The way we interpret it is that Oslo needs this. The municipality already has goals, on circularity. And how do you see this? Do you perceive this as an opportunity? And so, and then the answer is yes, from all 3. And then Pådrivere is able to sort of turn around and invite all of these actors into the conversation and say that, okay, the municipality has concluded that this is an opportunity they can't, miss. And Pådrivere is the tool to get that going. And the rest of the story you'll read about, or you already know, but the tent opened in Oslo 14 months after that first phone call. And so, like I know, 20 Norwegian million, I think. It's the first. A lot of money was pulled into this because so many different actors had ownership to the challenge, and they knew that they had to work on it. But instead of working on it in separate, entities and businesses, they saw the value of getting together. And Martin, as a citizen, he didn't know it, but by being one person who lived to this, he created a whole new sort of network of people, one person. So that was one citizen story, and I know that you've learned about this today, but I want to share a different story about a different citizen that we've met, because when I read your book, I thought about her in your examples, because Astrid, she lives and breathes as a citizen. She engages locally in her community on a daily basis. She starts initiatives. She writes a blog. She is, active in associations. It is about solidarity. It is about creativity. She gets meetings with politicians. She's a neighbor. She makes phone calls. She writes proposals. She initiates meetings and events, and she gets people together. And she is also a mother and a grandmother. And she finds Pådriv in Pådriv's early stages. And she operates She lives and is a citizen in Ellingsrud, Oslo. And when she finds Pådriv, she signs up, because you can sign up as a pådriver.
You all are right now, right?
Yeah. And none of you said pådriver when you asked about the question. I didn't either. But she finds this structure and this tool to be relevant for her. So even though she is, an immensely just living and breathing the citizen part, she also needs support. She also needs structure. She also needs places to meet other people, but also places where she can bring, where she can bring the things that she's already working on onto a platform where other people can join in. So when we first started, we were only working in one, not even just Oslo, but just one area of Oslo. And she waited and waited patiently, and she was nudging us, can you please work in all of Oslo? And then the day that we did and became Pådriv Oslo, she was ready to lift her wicked local problem onto the platform. And you should all follow Sammen for Ellingsrud, which is the result of her citizenship and using the tool. So you say that the power of contributing is in all of us. And I'm curious because I've also been following the citizen assemblies, and one point that was interesting to me was that how do you get citizens to, sustain the citizenship, I want to say, but to keep going, forever? What type of support do we need? So that I want to end my sort of intro there. You want to?
What do I want to say? I've met so many Astrids, so many, and so many of them don't have anywhere to put that stuff. This feels. I suddenly feel like I'm part of a promotional thing, and that wasn't the intention. But I'm like, genuinely, the infrastructure for this stuff just doesn't really exist, and it is the missing link. Right, the will, and the reason it happens is because, maybe this is the place to go a little bit, that the moment we're living in is one when is really difficult, right? Like I think we should all have deep empathy for ourselves and each other in this time, because we are living in a dying system. Amen, sister. For those on the feed, she said, hooray, hooray. but that is hard because there's a model called two loops. It's a theory of change. I'd encourage you to check it out. First proposed by the Bacana Institute, and we discovered this morning that it was right at the founding of So Central as well. And they were like, "We've seen this before, 13 years ago." But it draws a semicircle, as you guys are looking at me like that, which is the old dominant system that's in decline, and then a semicircle that doesn't meet like that, which is the emergent system that's still taking shape but is below the horizontal. And the argument, the reason for that is that there are times of really fundamental shift when an old dominant system is in decline and a new one is forming, but the lines aren't going to meet, right? Because the reason for that is because we've built all of the institutions and structures and systems of our time out of a story. And so that story shapes them and shapes us. So we've built institutions that treat us as consumers, at best, sometimes as subjects, actually. So our councils see themselves as service providers. Our businesses see us as our agency as only being to buy from them. Our charities even see us as needing direct return, like needing personal benefit in order to justify us donating to them. Like, and the nature of that sort of institutional design is it shapes us back. Like, it's very hard to respond to those institutions in any other way. And then these outriders, these Astrids, these Pådrivere, are there. They're always there because that is who we are, right? Because we are citizens by nature. And yet the structures aren't there to hold that. And so the work of, this is why I'm so excited about Pådrivere, and it's only as one example, right? Like, but it is an example of building an institution, and it's why it's so hard. I mean, even Thomas, who I think must be one of the most articulate and decent communicators I've come across on instinct, can't really describe it in a way that doesn't make it sound really freaking boring. Bless you, mate. You know I love you. But like, don't tell me about the legal structure, dude. What are you going? But it's because you're trying to speak into a different world, right? And that is an expression of where we're all trapped. We're all having to live in kind of two systems at once right now. And that is really hard. But maybe where I'll close this little soliloquy is just when I get excited. But it is the zoom out from Pådrivere a little bit to Oslo, to Norway, and this is a conversation I was having with the lovely Christina Lund. The opportunity here, you have more cognitive space here than most of the world, right? Let's be honest. The opportunity here to hold that tension, live into it, create some of these structures and processes, and export them is I hadn't realised. Like, this is the first time I haven't been to Norway for 20 odd years, 30 since my brother did the Junior World Rowing Championships in Oslo in 1993, but just arriving here, meeting you guys, being part of the thing I was part of yesterday, there is possibility, and it requires facing that challenge. It requires stepping into that. It requires taking the spirit of the Astrids and not turning away from that challenge. But if you can do it, like, damn, do we need you right now? I mean, I've just been in San Francisco, and I'm not going to tell you about that. So yeah, I'll stop there.
And I remind you, if you get ideas or thoughts or questions that you want to add to the conversation, just put your hand up. Oh, Kenneth, perfect.
Thank you. This is fascinating, but I just wanted to poke at a potential tension between what you started with citizen engagement and then Pådrivere as a way structural attempt to navigate this tension. I work part of my time as a lawyer with focusing on procurement, especially public procurement, and one way you can look at that is institutionalized consumption. And I think one of the difficulties many in this room face is they have some good ideas that primarily they just want to contribute, but in order to do that, they need to package themselves as an entrepreneur or as selling a service. And doesn't seem to me to be any reason why the only way you can engage these actors is through consumption or procurement, but that seems to be the default. So since you were talking about missing infrastructures, do you have any good stories about someone who's successfully hacked that system, or some ways of getting engaged that isn't through consumption?
Well, you can, if
No,
that was
you
your
go first.
answer. Your answer was Pådrivere. I'm just asking. No, it's interesting because the vice mayor that we had a meeting with yesterday is also a lawyer in public procurement. And she explicitly said that, but wait a minute, I know you have this presentation you want to get through, but this is what happens so many times. There are so many great initiatives, but there are so many barriers in the current structures that doesn't help it come into fruition, or it actually getting to system change. And her words and our words is also that to have this structure, this neutral structure, this social and systemic innovation that we can all, public, private, all sectors, use to get past what sort of, legal entity does it have to continue? Is it a business, or is it so I don't know if it's you asked him about examples, but there is still a very tight sort of connection to that.
Okay, I'm going to try and explain Pådrivere in my words. Because I do think but it's like, rather than having to become an entrepreneur and start a thing, you join this space, this association of people who are together trying to reshape their city, and you put forward your question into this space, and you go like, can we do that? What could we do together that none of us could do alone? And then that creates a different environment where it's not about who's the producer and who's the consumer and who's procuring and who's providing. It's about what are we trying to do together, and what are the means of doing that. And that's it's like a platform for collaboration rather than a marketplace. This is why I think it speaks to the idea of businesses and charities and government and individuals as citizens of a city, rather than marketplace procurement. And that's why. So I do think it's a really powerful answer to that context. I do think there are examples from elsewhere in the world, and what the thing that I relate Pådrivere to most directly is the emerging work on mission-driven government, right? Because what mission-driven government does is it creates a frame where the challenge is posed, and anyone who can contribute a solution has the frame in which to do it. So, for example, in the city of Manchester at the moment, where I'm doing a lot of work, I'm very excited about Manchester as a place. They're taking on the challenge of ensuring that everyone, set a city mission of ensuring that everyone has access to basic support and welfare provision in their neighbourhood, which they know that now, with the state of British infrastructure, the NHS and job centres and so forth can't provide, but we're still going to set that ambition to do that. And that gives you a context in which you go, well, how is that possible? Who do we get around the table to try and do that? Community organisations, people who own private landowners, landlords, owners of physical space. How do we make those things work together? And but what Manchester doesn't have yet, till I get back, is a legal structure, a vehicle that makes that naturally possible. So, but everyone is struggling for that context. The challenge you're setting is your framing is everywhere, because we are in the consumer story, because people who work in procurement are tasked with putting out freaking tenders that seek 3 competitive bids, because that's the theory we have for how you're going to get value for money. I mean, it's part of the same logic that leads to Elon Musk and Doge and and the idea that the ultimate goal of government should be efficiency, which is total nonsense and only a route to death, right? But while we're in that story, there's nothing we can do about that. So missions is kind of is one angle that people are starting to use, that's starting to open it up. But the reason I'm so excited about something like a Pådrivere is because it sort of creates it's basically a new kind of relational organization, a new kind of membership that I can be a member of. Well, I probably can't because I'm not Norwegian, but never mind, yet. But anyone can be part of that, can then work together on these things. It's like the missions are coming from top down, and this sort of idea of an association is coming from the bottom up. And I think when they meet, that's when the magic happens. I hope it's some kind of answer. I guess I'm just reflecting back. I think your challenge is universal because it comes from within consumer logic. And the only way to solve it is to start from within a different logic and create a different kind of institution and a different kind of structure to be able to meet it. And I think that is what's happening here.
All right, you know what to do if you want to add your voice to the conversation. Thomas, please.
Can I try something? Not talk about legal stuff, but no. But that's what Kenneth asked about. Because what actually is happening in this kind of structure, because it's not the only one, but this kind of structure is, say you are public sector, municipality, you're private sector, you're a company, you're non-profits, and I'm a citizen. So then there's a question that one of us puts on the table. What should we do about this? We come forward, discuss it. We agree that we should do something here. So we'll see, can we pull some money together? We put some money on the table. Or we ask a foundation or someone else on the outside to put money on the table. Then we agree that who's the best one of us to do something about it in the first stage. So maybe it's us two, but you are part of that decision. Even if I'm a private company, in this structure, I can take part of that money without the government actually acquiring me. And this is possible today. There's no barriers for it. There's a few things we have to make sure that it's open, that the results can be used by everyone and so forth. But this is possible. And no one knows it's possible. Because we think the only way is from you to procure me, which means that you decide what I should deliver, even if I maybe know more about the problem than you do. So that's sort of an example of what this structure does. And it really breaks this whole procurement. And procurement isn't wrong if you know what you're going to buy. But if you have no idea what the solution is, it's a really stupid way to go. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Tyler Dallahauger. I work with a private foundation that's trying to open up rooms of power within the philanthropic and international development sectors. So we're trying to transfer power from the inside. And what I just want to say, what I liked about your book was that you focus on different sectors and how you can change these 3 or 4 different sectors from the inside. But as has been raised here, building the new inside of a sector is really hard. And I want to go back to Sandra's question of what experiences do you have of maintaining, building the new, especially when there's so many fires to put out and stop the bad. Example would be the social movements I work with in the Global South. There's so many fires that they're fighting against right now. To have the room to be able to build the new is very difficult. So I would just say, do you have any thoughts on transforming a sector from the inside, and back to Sandra's question, maintaining that fight?
I think maybe just to position myself a little bit in this, I think my primary function is sort of a storyteller and a pollinator. So what I'm trying to do is spot where, because I think, and the reason I say that is firstly to be clear that I don't think I'm coming up with an awful lot of the answers to this directly, but I think what I am, the function I'm thinking about this a lot at the moment, but I think the function I'm providing is sort of spotting where these things are emerging, because they are emerging, because we're all staring at the same challenge, and then trying to pollinate and link them up. So I just want to within that, I guess where I go with that is, I think somewhere in the world, someone will be finding the answer to this question in pretty much every sector. What occurs to me is that in philanthropy in particular, the community foundations, I think, are trying some really interesting work at the moment, and the global, I can't remember what they're called, but the Global Community Foundations Organisation is experimenting in some really interesting ways. I'll maybe talk to the sector that's probably closest to my heart, which is the community scale organisations themselves. And one of my favourite initiatives there is something called Open Collective, that people may or may not have seen. It's essentially an open source software platform that enables any group of people, without forming an organisation, to create an open budget online, so that all of their incomings and outgoings are visible, and to receive donations into that budget. And that's kind of revolutionary, because now, before you start trying to do something as a group of people, you don't have to form an organisation, create a board, like do all of the admin stuff. You can just start operating with that structure. And this became pretty huge in 2020, because it became a structure that could enable mutual aid to happen during COVID, kind of overnight. Enable local people to work together and be more than the sum of their parts. And I think Open Collective, and I don't know if it's very well used in Norway. It needs an in-country fiscal sponsor to really unlock its power. So if there isn't one thriving yet in Norway, then so central you've got another job on your hands. But that's one example. And I think there aren't enough answers to that yet. Maybe the other place I'd point for now, one of the things I'm most excited about is actually is not yet a kind of infrastructure, but more of a process that I think is going to soon start giving birth to infrastructure, which is what's being called human learning systems. I don't know if anyone has come across this work. So I'll go there a little bit. So human learning systems is basically an approach to accountability, and the idea. The guy who's doing a lot of the work behind this is a lovely human being. I'm going to go into storyteller mode because it makes it more fun anyway, rather than just talking about structures. Is that cool? Thanks. Approved. So Sky Toby dropped out of school, and he was a bit of a raver, and he then started doing participatory theatre in his local community, and he found that it was like getting people engaged, giving people a sense of agency, people with many, many challenges kind of finding their voice, and he was like, this is badass, let's go and get some money and make this massive. Couldn't find funding. And so he went down the rabbit hole, and he's now become one of the world's leading scholars of government. Because he was like, why can't I get money for this? It's demonstrably the answer. And in so doing, he became, and what's made him this leading scholar is he became deeply irate about the concept of what's called new public management, and target-based accountability. And this is everywhere, right? Like when governments, I mean, in the UK, we love announcing how many nurses there are going to be, and how long waiting lists are going to be, and like, because target-based accountability is this mythical thing where you can set a target as a governing body and then hold people to account to deliver that target. There's a literature review that Toby and his gang were behind that showed that 80% of targets are gained, and 74% of things of sort of responses to target-based accountability are outright lies. and Toby's thing is like, you set a target, you create a game, And part of it is because targets always try and cut through, the languages cut through complexity, right? And you can't. All you do is you pretend it's not there. There's this lovely image of that he showed me once to express his work, where there's in the middle of the drawing, there's a little meeting room, and there's someone writes A, arrow, B on the board in this meeting room, and everyone's like smiling and nodding. And then someone opens the door to the meeting room, and there's this giant squiggle on the outside of like all the other letters. And it's like, oh, because that's what actually happens. And so, so human learning systems is basically saying, how about we admit that? And how about we actually design processes that are about coming side by side, a little bit as Thomas was just demonstrating with us, that say, what if we put the challenge or the work in the center, we come side by side and we figure out what our collective first experiment might be, and then come back together, learn about how it's gone, decide our next experiment, do that. And I think this is starting to translate into an awful lot of institutional design and infrastructure, just starting. Because so in government, and particularly in local authorities, there's some really interesting experiments around the world applying this logic, which I think is a citizen logic, right? Like new public management is consumer logic of accountability. It says, this is the product I want to buy, you go and deliver it to me, for me. Whereas human learning system says, I'm going to have to get in it. We're going to have to stand side by side. We're going to do this together. We're going to find collective agency. We're going to be citizens in it, not consumers of it. So give you an example, you'll find case study after case study, but one of the most profound comes from social services, social welfare provision in the UK, and the story of an individual who's codenamed Brian, who had cost Gateshead Council himself, one individual, something like £2 million over 8 years, because his life went off the rails. But in the current design of social service provision, he was supported by 10 different service providers, including a prison, and the budgets that each of them were spending on him separately added up to millions of pounds. Toby got invited in to do an experiment, like cleared all that stuff away, put a single caseworker beside Brian to understand him, navigate it, figured out that actually his life had just gone, he was a train driver and someone jumped in front of his train and his life went wrong. And like built his confidence, helped him navigate all of these services. 6 months later, his annual cost to them was down to £7,000. Like the moment you see him, that guy as someone to sort of work with to understand his context. And now the interesting thing is, right, okay, so what does that look like when you scale that out to a model for social service provision at the scale of a whole local authority? How do you design the management structures? But I think, and it's going into philanthropy as well, by the way. Like there are increasing experiments with human learning systems as an approach to philanthropy, because the philanthrocapitalists and the effective altruists and all of those think they can buy the solutions to complex problems. It's total nonsense. And all they're doing is actually creating more externalities and making things worse. And so there are experiments. I think ECF, the European Climate Foundation, has done an experiment with where you start by actually coming into a system and going, who understands this system best? How do we create a learning group? Can we put a bit of money into this to start with, do some experiments, and then pile more money in and attract more actors into this sort of inquiry group? So all of which is, again, an extraordinarily long answer, but is just to say, I don't think we have them all yet. There are probably more than I know about. And I think that they are starting to emerge. And maybe the most important thing I would say is I'd encourage us all to, I go back to the thing I was saying about living in two systems at once, right? Like acknowledging that fact, knowing that that's the situation we're in is actually a very powerful thing to do, because then you can sort of say to yourself, okay, whether you're a student at the moment who might be being taught in a consumer paradigm, you might have to kind of take some of that education and go, okay, that's the world I'm living in, and I have to understand it, and I have to be able to work within it. And I'm also going to find a way to hold that tension and see if I can find ways to learn in a different kind of way of thinking. Now I want to jump off, because we were talking earlier about Elinor Ostrom and commons-based management, and I want to go there, but like, I'm going to shut up. But I think it's there are things emerging all the time, and knowing that we're living in the gap between systems, and that we might have to put up with and work with some of the old, but also be seeking the new is probably the way to be.
I think we're gonna get into a little bit more Pådrivere, like how is it set up, but more concretely. But I think we're also gonna get a little bit into citizens' assemblies, like that way of engaging as a citizen, because you've worked with this, we work with this, and we've talked about this. So if you have questions and thoughts about that, you can also get them ready. I also want to say, for those of you in the room, also you on the stream, it is Friday. It is past lunchtime. Like, if you need coffee, there's nuts over there. Like, get your energy level up to stay in it. And then soon you can go outside and have a beer. Yes. But Pådrivere, we've talked about it as a tool and infrastructure, way to like support all of these ideas, these initiatives, these citizens, these businesses. But it is a partnership also of businesses, of government entities, of NGOs, of people piling together money, essentially, to fund this as an organization. And we've talked a little bit about the challenge of keeping up that revenue stream, because the funding has to come from somewhere. And how do we, as businesses or as the public sector entity that we work in, see that we can't only want the results from initiatives like Pådrivere, we also have to support the boring part, the infrastructure part, and over time, because we are always looking for the next most exciting thing to put our money into, or time or resources. I think an answer to like how do we navigate this very difficult time is maybe we should also stay in some of these initiatives longer than we normally would have, and not shop for another network or another way of doing things, but try and build more on what we have. So, but I think that the question is maybe like, how do we get more potential partners in initiatives like this to think and act like citizens, instead of saying, oh yeah, my business is very conscious and we have a lot of ways for people to interact and do things with us, but how do we get them to see that they also need to participate outside of their own structure or organization? So a little bit into that.
Sorry, passing back and forth. I mean, my answer to what is essentially, I think, a question like, how do you get people to buy into things as citizens? How do you communicate in a way that invites people to buy into things as citizens, instead of a way that invites them to buy from you as consumers? And the answer to that question basically comes back to purpose and being really explicit about what it is they're buying into. My favourite, but probably the best example from my work to date has been the work I've been involved in with an organisation called the National Trust. I'm just going to check the room for anyone not have a clue what I'm talking about. Okay, good. So the National Trust is a UK organisation founded in 1895, pretty old. The purpose of which in law is to promote the preservation of places of historic interest and natural beauty for the benefit of everyone forever. Humble thing. In the consumer era, what they had become was essentially a visitor attraction business. So they owned stately homes and castles and a whole load of the UK coastline, and basically charged for car parks and tickets. And the purpose had kind of disappeared, right? Because the business model was to sell tickets and then use the money behind the scenes, because people are kind of lazy and selfish and they just want their days out and they're not really interested in what we're actually doing. What that created was a massive underlying foundational business problem, because no one believed in the purpose of the organisation, and we'd all disconnected from the idea that special places matter, that beauty matters, and because we were just consuming days out on a transactional basis, and we'd eroded the underlying kind of infrastructure, I guess you could say, the sort of spiritual infrastructure maybe. And that manifested as that came to the point. I mean, I think this is a very good metaphor for where our societies are at as a whole. That came to a point where it became a business problem, because hundreds of thousands of people were joining the organisation every year on the basis that membership of the organisation was a free pass card. So it made financial sense to join if you were visiting more than 3 places a year. But almost all of them, almost the same number, were leaving every year. And so as a result, huge cost per acquisition of member and very high churn rate, and not a sustainable organisation. Think about where we're at now with Doge and trying to do government efficiency, continually trying to deliver the same thing more efficiently. You get to a point where you can't do that, and so the consumer business model actually falls over. And so what the work we've done over the last 8-9 years was basically saying, well, what if we put the purpose back at the heart of this? If we say this organisation isn't a visitor attraction business, it's a movement for beauty. And we invite people to buy into that, and we reframe. We got some quite silly places for a while. We were reframing days out as acts of love of place, and then we were like, maybe we shouldn't say that. but we did simple things like thank you messages at the exit of every place. So thank you for your visit today. It was a contribution to helping keep this place special. In the consumer, the membership point of sale, it was all red and was free when you do this, and it's not car insurance, guys. And so reframing the membership as being part of a movement, part of a cause, and overnight the churn rate dropped through the floor. People, pretty much the same number of people joined every year, but vastly fewer left, and the organisation reached. Its target had been 5 million members, I think by 2021, and it hit that target in 2017, within 3 years of starting the program of work that we designed. So, so the equivalent here, I think, is you're saying, and when we were chatting earlier about Pådrivere, and I was just saying, well, if you made me come up with a brand campaign for this now, or you made me give it a name that might live outside of Norway. I was the first words that come into my head are we make, and then the name of the city that you're in, or the country or whatever, because what I'm wanting to do is say embed the idea that what you're buying into is being someone who takes part in making this city. We're inviting your organisation, your business, your charity, your foundation, the city government to buy into a partnership to make the city what it could possibly be, rather than just to sign up to a status for itself. And I don't that was literally in a meeting off the top of head, and it's probably rubbish. But the spirit behind it, the question I'm asking is what's the purpose? What are people buying into together? And the characteristics of that, or it has to be something meaningful, and it has to be something collective. So when you think about the National Trust, a ticket to a visitor attraction isn't particularly meaningful, and it's individual, right? I buy that ticket. A movement for beauty is something that has to be collective. It's not a movement. You're not a movement on your own, much as I would like to be. But when you make it collective, then you're into something. So yeah.
It makes me think of when I joined So Central, which is almost 10 years ago, and I was working then at NAV, the Norwegian Welfare Administration, and I asked my union at the time, okay, so I'm moving my place of work. It's going to be a very small team. And later I also became a co-owner. And I asked them, like, so I don't really understand, how does my membership work now? Why should I still be a member? And I expected this, like, exciting answer, like, oh, let's find out together. Or, oh, yeah, we have a whole setup for people like you. And the answer I got was just, like, a list of the member benefits, like cheaper insurance. And you get this discount when you buy so-and-so. And so I quit my membership immediately. No one invited me into anything, even though I specifically asked them. And I think it's a reflection of people respond the way you treat them. So if you treat them as a consumer, they'll respond as a consumer and they'll say, no, okay, that's not for me, you know? Yeah, sure.
So many things I want to say, but I'll just say a couple. Yes, and unions, like, what a freaking waste. Imagine if they'd said to you, like, not even an invite to be involved in something, if they just said, do you still believe that welfare matters? Because if you do, you should probably still stay a member. This translates the other direction as well, because corporate businesses can treat people as citizens too, right? Some experimental work that I've been involved in with a large sports brand, who shall remain nameless because there's filming, but you will know immediately. Like, if you really believe that your purpose is to unleash the athlete in everyone, do you just sell shoes? No. Right? You create the context where people can do more sport. You do citizen science in cities to map the best run routes, and you create movements, and those will be better business models. This sort of back to your question to me at the beginning, which is sort of the implicit, are you a communist? Like, this is joyful and creative and value creating and amazing. And like, unions would so thrive off this. And then the thing about when you treat people as consumers, they respond as consumers. Treat them as citizens, they respond as citizens. That is demonstrably true even at a social psych experimental level. One of the most, like, I should have said at the beginning, actually, I started my career working in the advertising industry. That was fun! Had a breakdown. That was great. But one of the things that triggered that breakdown was doing some social psych research with various academics, and one of the most profound was we did a survey where we gave 2,000 people a resource dilemma scenario. We said you're one of 4 people dependent on a single well for your water supply, and the well's running dry. And then we asked them 2 questions. Firstly, to what extent are you prepared to use less water? And secondly, to what extent do you trust the other 3 to use less water? And the clever bit is for half the sample, we framed it as consumers. You're one of 4 consumers dependent on a single well for your water supply. To what extent do you trust the other 3 consumers? For the other half of the sample, it was households. You're one of 4 households. You know where I'm going, right? When the word is consumer, the single word is consumer, levels of willingness to compromise and levels of trust. Literally, when we use even that word, let alone when we sort of put those norms out into the world, notice as you go into your daily lives, how organisations are treating you and thinking about you. Are they trying to make the cost benefit add up for you as a consumer? Are they inviting you into your agency as a citizen? Are they actually treating you as a subject? And notice those things, and know when you're part of the different ones as well.
Okay. It's just to give an example of the conversations that I have with businesses, and it's almost always comparing this to any other network, happens almost every time. Well, we get a lot of, networks approaching us, and so we need to have a look at the whole picture and see if. And it's almost always what's in it for us. And they say it in English. All of them say it in English. And it's funny and tragical at the same time, maybe, but they usually, they almost get mad that they can't buy anything from Pådrivere. Well, you tell me I can't buy anything from you, so what do you expect me to do? I don't know how to use this. And so there's so many sort of hurdles and barriers into this conversation that we've experienced in recruiting into the bigger story. And you do not respond to when Thomas talks about the legal stuff, but then yesterday we met this person who loved it. So I've told you already, it feels like a communication hell because we need to communicate it to everyone at the same time, and all of you have different ways of sort of connecting to it. So I'm excited for the way forward, and maybe it's We Make. Or maybe it's something else, but to have them buy into something that's bigger than themselves. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Maria. I haven't read your book yet, but I'm definitely going to. I was just sitting and thinking a bit about, so we talked a lot about citizens as consumers. But like in Norway and in the Nordic states, we all have like these very strong welfare states, and which also makes us maybe also a bit passive as citizens, because we always expect like we have this problem, we have to solve this problem, and the state should solve it, or the municipality should solve it. It's never like, what can we do as citizens? It's because we have so much expectations and trust in the state, which is a good thing as well. But do you see like a difference between countries with strong states, strong welfare states, and countries that haven't got that? You mentioned Manchester, where like the state or the municipality is sort of failing, and that awakens the citizens. And can we have like, how do we awaken the citizens in strong welfare states? Because I work in a network of municipalities, and we try to work with citizen engagement, and they also struggle with like that the citizens always say like, yes, the municipality should fix that, and we try to like, how can we awaken the community? Yeah, so some thoughts about that.
It's almost like we paid you to